A. Concept of insurance. B. Elements of an insurance contract. C. Characteristics and nature of insurance contracts. D. Classes 1. Marine. 2. Fire. 3. Casualty. 4. Suretyship. 5. Life. 6. Microinsurance. 7. Compulsory motor vehicle liability insurance. 8. Compulsory insurance coverage for agency-hired workers. E. Variable contracts. F. Insurable interest. 1. In life, health. 2. In property. 3. Double insurance and overinsurance. 4. Multiple or several interests on same property. G. Perfection of the contract of insurance. 1. Offer and acceptance consensuality. A. Delay and acceptance. B. Delivery of policy. 2. Premium payment. 3. Non-default options in life insurance. 4. Reinstatement of a lapsed policy of life insurance. 5. Refund of premiums. H. Rescission of insurance contracts. 1. Concealment. 2. Misrepresentation omissions. 3. Breach of warranties. I. Claims settlement and subrogation. 1. Notice and proof of loss. 2. Guidelines on claim settlement. A. Unfair claims settlement sanctions. B. Prescription of action. C. Subrogation. J. Business of insurance requirements. K. Insurance Commissioner and its powers. 2. Pre-need. A. Definition. 1. Pre-need plans. 2. Pre-need company. B. Registration of pre-need plans. C. Licensing of sales counselor and general agent. D. Default and termination. E. Claims settlement. 3. Transportation law. A. Common carriers. 1. Diligence required of common carriers. 2. Liabilities of common carriers. 3. Classification of transport network vehicle services and transport network companies. B. Vigilance over goods. 1. Exempting causes. A. Requirement of absence of negligence. B. Absence of delay. C. Due diligence to prevent or lessen the loss. 2. Contributory negligence. 3. Duration of liability. A. Delivery of goods to common carrier. B. Actual or constructive delivery. C. Temporary unloading or storage. 4. Stipulation for limitation of liability. A. Void stipulations. B. Limitation of liability to fixed amount. C. Limitation of liability in absence of declaration of greater value. 5. Liability for baggage of passengers. A. Checked-in baggage. B. Baggage in possession of passengers. C. Safety of passengers. 1. Void stipulations. 2. Duration of liability. A. Waiting for carrier or boarding of carrier. B. Arrival at destination. 3. Liability for acts of others. A. Employees. B. Other passengers and strangers. 4. Liability for delay in commencement of voyage. 5. Liability for defects in equipment and facilities. 6. Extent of liability for damages. D. Bill of lading. 1. Threefold character. 2. Delivery of goods. A. Period for delivery. B. Delivery without surrender of bill of lading. C. Refusal of consignee to take delivery. 3. Period for filing claims. 4. Period for filing actions. 5. Effects of stipulations. E. Maritime commerce. 1. Charter parties. A. Bareboat demise charter. B. Time charter. C. Voyage trip charter. 2. Liability of ship owners and shipping agents. A. Liability for acts of captain. B. Exceptions to limited liability. 3. Accidents and damages in maritime commerce. A. General average. B. Collisions and elisions. 4. Carriage of goods by sea act. A. Application. B. Notice of loss or damage. C. Period of prescription. D. Limitation of liability. F. Public service ACT. 1. Definition of public utility. 2. Necessity for certificate of public convenience. A. Requisites. I. Citizenship. E. Promotion of public interests. E. Financial capability. B. Prior operator rule. I. Meaning. E. Exceptions. E. Ruinous competition. 3. Fixing of rate. A. Rate of return. B. Exclusion of income tax as expense. 4. Unlawful arrangements. A. Boundary system. B. Cabot system. 5. Approval of sale, encumbrance or lease of property. G. Through ARSAW Convention. 1. Applicability. 2. Limitation of liability. A. Liability to passengers. B. Liability for checked baggage. C. Liability for hand-carried baggage. 3. Willful misconduct. IV. Business organizations. A. Partnerships. 1. General provisions. A. Definition. B. Elements. C. Characteristics. D. Rules to determine existence. E. Partnership term. F. Partnership by estoppel. G. Partnership is distinguished from joint venture. H. Professional partnership. I. Management. 2. Rights and obligations of partnership and partners. A. Rights and obligations of the partnership. B. Obligations of partners among themselves. C. Obligations of partnership partners to third persons. 3. Dissolution and winding up. 4. Limited partnership. B. Corporate DONS. 1. Definition of corporation. 2. Classes of corporations. 3. Nationality of corporations. A. Control test. B. Grandfather rule FL. 4. Corporate juridical personality. A. Doctrine of separate juridical personality. I. Liability for tort and crimes. E. Recovery of damages. B. Doctrine of piercing the corporate veil. I. Grounds for application of doctrine. E. Test in determining applicability. 5. Capital structure. A. Number and qualifications of incorporators. B. Subscription requirements. C. Corporate term. D. Classification of shares. I. Preferred shares versus common shares. 1I. Scope of voting rights subject to classification. E. Founders shares. IV. Redeemable shares. V. Treasury shares. 6. Incorporation and organization. A. Promoter. I. Liability of promoter. 1I. Liability of corporation for promoter's contracts. B. Subscription contract. C. Pre-incorporation subscription agreements. D. Consideration for stocks. E. Articles of incorporation. I. Contents. 1I. Non-amendable items. F. Corporate name. Limitations on use of corporate name. G. Registration, incorporation and commencement of corporate existence. H. Election of directors or trustees. I. Adoption of bylaws. I. Contents of bylaws. 1I. Binding effects. E. Amendments. J. Effects of non-use of corporate charter. 7. Corporate powers. A. General powers theory of general capacity. B. Specific powers theory of specific capacity. C. Power to extend or shorten corporate term. D. Power to increase or decrease capital stock or create, increase bonded indebtedness. E. Power to deny preemptive rights. F. Power to sell or dispose corporate assets. G. Power to acquire own shares. H. Power to invest corporate funds in another corporation or business. 1. Power to declare dividends. J. Power to enter into management contract. I.K. Limitations. I. Ultra vires acts. A. Applicability of ultra vires doctrine. B. Consequences of ultra vires acts. 1. Doctrine of individuality of subscription. M. Doctrine of equality of shares. N. Trust fund doctrine. I. Exercised. A. By the shareholders. B. By the board of directors. C. By the officers. 8. Stockholders and members. A. Fundamental rights of a stockholder. B. Participation in management. I. Proxy. E. Voting trust. E. Cases when stockholders' action is required. A. By a majority vote. B. By a two-thirds vote. C. By cumulative voting. IV. Manner of voting. C. Proprietary rights. I. Right to dividends. E. Appraisal right. A. When available. B. Manner of exercise of right. E. Right to inspect. IV. Preemptive right. V. Right to vote. V. Right to dividends. D. Remedial rights. I. Individual suit. E. Representative suit. E. Derivative suit. E. Obligations of a stockholder. F. Meetings. I. Regular or special. E. Notice of meetings. E. Place and time of meetings. IV. Quorum. V. Minutes and agenda of meetings. 9. Board of Directors and Trustees. A. Repository of corporate powers. B. Tenure, qualifications and disqualifications of directors. C. Requirement of independent directors. D. Elections. I. Cumulative voting. E. Quorum. E. Removal. Page 6 of 19. I. F. Filling of vacancies. G. Compensation. H. Disloyalty. I. Business judgment rule. J. Solidary liabilities for damages. K. Personal liabilities. 1. Responsibility for crimes. M. Special fact doctrine. N. Inside information. O. Contracts. I. By self-dealing directors with the corporation. E. Between corporations with interlocking directors. P. Executive and other special committees. I. Creation. E. Limitations on its powers. Q. Meetings. I. Regular or special. A. When and where. B. Notice. C. Attendance in meetings. 1I. Who presides. E. Quorum. IV. Rule on abstention. 10. Capital affairs. A. Certificate of stock. I. Nature of the certificate. 1I. Uncertificated shares. E. Negotiability. Requirements for valid transfer of stocks. IV. Issuance. A. Full payment. B. Payment pro rata. V. Stock and transfer book. A. Contents. B. Who may make valid entries. C. Stock transfer agent. V1. Lost or destroyed certificates. V. Situs of the shares of stock. B. Watered stocks. I. Definition. E. Liability of directors for watered stocks. E. Trust fund doctrine for liability for watered stocks. C. Payment of balance of subscription. I. Call by board of directors. E. Notice requirement. D. Sale of delinquent shares. I. Effect of delinquency. 1I. Call by resolution of the board of directors. E. Notice of sale. IV. Auction sale. Page 7 of 19. I.e. Alienation of shares. I. Allowable restrictions on the sale of shares. 1I. Sale of partially paid shares. E. Sale of a portion of shares not fully paid. IV. Sale of all of shares not fully paid. V. Sale of fully paid shares. V. Requisites of a valid transfer. V. Involuntary dealings. F. Corporate books and records. I. Records to be kept at principal office. E. Right to inspect corporate records. E. Effect of refusal to inspect corporate records. 11. Dissolution and liquidation. A. Modes of dissolution. I. Voluntary dissolution. A. Where no creditors are affected. B. Where creditors are affected. C. By shortening of corporate term. D. Withdrawal of dissolution. E. Involuntary dissolution. B. Methods of liquidation. I. By the corporation itself. 1I. Conveyance to a trustee within a 3-year period. E. By management committee or rehabilitation receiver. IV. Liquidation after 3 years. 12. Other corporations. A. Close corporations. I. Characteristics of a close corporation. 1I. Validity of restrictions on transfer of shares. E. Issuance or transfer of stock in breach of qualifying conditions. 1V. When board meeting is unnecessary or improperly held. V. Preemptive right. V. Amendment of articles of incorporation. V. Deadlocks. B. Non-stock corporations. I. Definition. 1I. Purposes. E. Treatment of profits. IV. Plan and distribution of assets upon dissolution. C. Educational corporations. D. Religious corporations. I. Corporation sole nationality. E. Religious societies. E. One-person corporations. I. Accepted corporations. 1I. Capital stock requirement. E. Articles of incorporation and bylaws. IV. Corporate name. Page 8 of 19. V. Corporate structure and officers. V. Nominee. V. Minutes and records. V. 111. Liability. X. Conversion of corporation to one-person corporations and vice versa. F. Foreign corporations. I. Bases of authority over foreign corporations. A. Consent. B. Doctrine of doing business. E. Necessity of a license to do business. A. Requisites for issuance of a license. B. Resident agent. C. Amendment of license. E. Personality to sue. IV. Suability of foreign corporations. V. Instances when unlicensed foreign corporations may be allowed to sue isolated transactions. V. Grounds for revocation of license. 13. Merger and consolidation. A. Definition and concept. B. Distinguish constituent and consolidated corporation. C. Plan of merger or consolidation. D. Articles of merger or consolidation. E. Procedure. F. Effectivity. G. Limitations. H. Effects. 14. Investigations, offenses, and penalties. A. Authority of Commissioner. I. Investigation and prosecution of offenses. E. Administration of oath and issuance of subpoena. E. Cease and desist power. IV. Contempt. B. Sanctions for violations. I. Administrative sanctions. E. Prohibited acts. E. Penalties. IV. Who are liable. C. Authority of the Securities and Exchange Commission. V. Securities. A. State policy. B. Definition of securities. C. Kinds of securities. 1. Exempt securities. Page 9 of 19. F2. Exempt transactions. 3. Non-exempt transactions. D. Powers and functions of the Securities and Exchange Commission. E. Procedure for registration of securities. F. Prohibitions on fraud, manipulation, and insider trading. 1. Manipulation of security prices. 2. Short sales. 3. Option trading. 4. Fraudulent transactions. 5. Insider trading. G. Protection of shareholder interests. 1. Tender offer rule. 2. Rules on proxy solicitation. 3. Disclosure rule. V. Banking. A. The new central bank SCT. A. State policies. B. Creation of the Banco Central ng Pilipinas. C. Responsibility and primary objective. D. Corporate powers. E. Operations of the Banco Central ng Pilipinas. A. Authority to obtain data and information. B. Supervision and examination. C. Bank deposits and investments. D. Prohibitions. E. Examination and fees. F. Monetary board powers and functions. G. How the Banco Central ng Pilipinas handles banks in distress. A. Conservatorship. B. Closure. C. Receivership. D. Liquidation. H. Administrative sanctions on supervised entities. I. Rules on bank deposits and investments by directors, officers, stockholders and their related interests. J. Supervision and regulation of bank operations. A. Loans and other credit accommodations. B. Selective regulation. I. Margin requirements against letters of credit. 1I. Required security against bank loans. E. Portfolio ceilings. IV. Minimum capital ratios. K. Rate of exchange. Page 10 of 19. IB. Law on secrecy of bank deposits. 1. Purpose. 2. Prohibited acts. 3. Deposits covered. 4. Exceptions. 5. Garnishment of deposits, including foreign deposits. 6. Penalties for violation. C. General Banking ACT. 1. Definition and classification of banks. 2. Distinction of banks from quasi-banks and trust entities. 3. Bank powers and liabilities. A. Corporate powers. B. Banking and incidental powers. 4. Diligence required of banks in view of fiduciary nature of banking. 5. Nature of bank funds and bank deposits. 6. Grant of loans and security requirements. A. Ratio of net worth to total risk assets. B. Single borrower's limit. C. Restrictions on bank exposure to directors, officers, stockholders, and their related interests. D. Prohibited acts of borrowers. E. Floating interest rates and escalation clauses. 7. Penalties for violations. A. Fine, imprisonment. B. Suspension or removal of director or officer. C. Dissolution of bank. D. Philippine Deposit Insurance Corporation ACT. 1. Basic policy. 2. Powers and functions of the Philippine Deposit Insurance Corporation. Prohibitions. 3. Concept of insured deposits. 4. Liability to depositors. A. Deposit liabilities required to be insured with Philippine Deposit Insurance Corporation. B. Commencement of liability. C. Deposit accounts not entitled to payment. D. Extent of liability. E. Determination of insured deposits. F. Calculation of liability. I. Per depositor, per capacity rule. E. Joint accounts. E. Mode of payment. IV. Effect of payment of insured deposits. V. Payment of insured deposits as preferred credit. V. Failure to settle claim of insured depositor. Page 11 of 19. IV 11. Failure of depositor to claim insured deposits. A. Examination of banks and deposit accounts. B. Prohibition against splitting of deposits. C. Prohibition against issuances of temporary restraining orders. 5. Concept of bank resolution. 6. Role of the Philippine Deposit Insurance Corporation in relation to banks in distress. A. Closure and takeover. B. Conservatorship. C. Receivership. D. Liquidation. 7. Intellectual property. A. Intellectual property rights in general. 1. Intellectual property rights. 2. Differences between copyright, trademarks, and patents. 3. Technology transfer arrangement. B. Patents. 1. Patentable invention. 2. Non-patentable invention. 3. Ownership of a patent. A. Right to a patent. B. First to file rule. C. Invention created pursuant to a commission. D. Right of priority. 4. Grounds for cancellation of a patent. 5. Remedy of the true and actual inventor. 6. Rights conferred by a patent. 7. Limitations of patent rights. A. Prior user. B. Used by the government. 8. Patent infringement. A. Tests in patent infringement. I. Literal infringement. E. Doctrine of equivalence. B. Civil and criminal action. C. Prescriptive period. D. Defenses in action for infringement. 9. Licensing. A. Voluntary. B. Compulsory. 10. Assignment and transmission of rights. C. Trademarks. 1. Definitions of marks, collective marks, and trade names. 2. Acquisition of ownership of mark. 3. Acquisition of ownership of trade name. Page 12 of 19. J. 4. Non-registerable marks. 5. Prior use of mark as a requirement. 6. Tests to determine confusing similarity between marks. A. Dominancy test. B. Holistic test. C. Item sonans. 7. Well-known marks. 8. Rights conferred by registration. 9. Used by third parties of names, etc. similar to registered mark. 10. Infringement and remedies. A. Trademark infringement. B. Damages. C. Requirement of notice. D. Penalties. 11. Unfair competition. 12. Registration of marks under the Madrid Protocol. A. Coverage. B. Rights conferred. C. Requirements for registration. D. Term of protection. D. Copyright. A. 1. Basic principles. 2. Copyrightable works. A. Original works. B. Derivative works. 3. Non-copyrightable works. 4. Rights of copyright owner. 5. Rules on ownership of copyright. 6. Limitations on copyright. A. Fair use. 7. Copyright infringement. A. Remedies. B. Criminal penalties. 8. Special laws. Secured transactions. 1. Personal Property Securities Act. A. Definitions and scope. B. Asset-specific rules. I. Future property. 1I. Rights to proceeds and commingled funds. E. Tangible assets commingled in a mass. IV. Accounts receivables. C. Perfection of security interests. D. Registration. E. Priority of security interests. F. Tangible assets, intangible assets. Page 13 of 19. FG. Enforcement of security interests. H. Prior interests in the transitional period. 2. Real estate mortgage law. A. Definition and characteristics. I. Obligations secured by real estate mortgage. E. Object of real estate mortgage. E. Right to alienate mortgage credit. IV. Right to alienate collateral. B. Essential requisites. 3. Guarantee. A. Nature and extent of guarantee. I. Obligation secured by guarantee. E. Parties to a guarantee. E. Excussion. IV. Right to protection. V. Right to indemnification. V. Right to subrogation. V. Rights of co-guarantors. B. Effects of guarantee. C. Extinguishment of guarantee. D. Legal and judicial bonds. 4. Surety. A. Concept. B. Form of surety. C. Obligations secured. D. Surety distinguished from stand-by letter of credit. E. Surety distinguished from guarantee. F. Surety distinguished from joint and solidary obligations. 5. Letters of credit. A. Definition and purpose. B. Kinds of letters of credit. C. Rule of strict compliance. D. Independence principle. B. Truth in lending. ACT. 1. Purpose. 2. Obligation of creditors to person to whom credit is extended. 3. Covered and excluded transactions. 4. Consequences of non-compliance with obligation. C. Anti-money laundering. ACT. 1. Policy of the law. 2. Covered institutions and their obligations. 3. Covered and suspicious transactions. 4. Money laundering, how committed unlawful activities are. Predicate crimes. 5. Anti-money laundering counsel functions. 6. Safe harbor provision, page 14 of 19. Item 7. Application for freeze orders. A. Who may apply. B. Effectivity. C. Duties of covered institutions. 8. Authority to inquire into bank deposits. A. Forfeiture provisions. B. Mutual assistance among states. D. Foreign investments. ACT. 1. Policy of the law. 2. Definition of terms. A. Foreign investment. B. Doing business in the Philippines. C. Export enterprise. D. Domestic market enterprise. 3. Registration of investments of non-Philippine nationals. 4. Foreign investments in export enterprises. 5. Foreign investments in domestic market enterprises. 6. Foreign investment negative list. E. Insolvency laws. 1. Concurrence and preference of credits. A. Meaning of concurrence and preference. B. Exempt properties. C. Classification of credits. D. Order of preference of credits. 2. Financial Rehabilitation and Insolvency Act of 2010. A. Definition of insolvency. B. Suspension of payments. C. Rehabilitation. I. Types. E. Commencement order. E. Stay or suspension order. IV. Rehabilitation receiver. V. Management committee. V. Rehabilitation plan. V. Cram down effect. D. Liquidation. I. Types. E. Conversion of rehabilitation to liquidation proceedings. E. Liquidation order. IV. Rights of secured creditors. V. Liquidator. V. Determination of claims. V. Liquidation of plan. F. Data privacy. ACT of 2012. 1. Definitions and scope. 2. Extraterritorial application. Page 15 of 19. I3. Processing of personal information. A. General principles. B. Sensitive and privileged information. C. Subcontracting. D. Privileged communication. 4. Rights of the data subject. Exceptions. Non-applicability. 5. Duties and responsibilities of personal information controller. G. Philippine competition. ACT. 1. Definitions and scope of application. 2. Powers and functions of the Philippine Competition Commission. 3. Prohibited acts. A. Anti-competitive agreements. I. Per se violations. E. Not per se violations. B. Abuse of dominant position. C. Prohibited mergers and acquisitions. D. Exceptions. 4. Covered transactions. A. Thresholds for compulsory notification. B. Notifying entity. C. Exceptions. 5. Determining the relevant market. 6. Determining control or dominance of market. 7. Determining existence of anti-competitive conduct. 8. Forbearance by the Philippine Competition Commission. Page 16 of 19. List of relevant materials. 1987 Constitution. 2. Civil Code of the Philippines. On transportation, surety, guarantee, real estate mortgage, and concurrence and preference of credits. 3. Laws and Regulations. Pres. Decree No. 612. As amended by Representative Act No. 10607. The Insurance Code. Representative Act No. 9829 Pre-Need Code of the Philippines. Act No. 2616 The Salvage Law. Commonwealth Act No. 65 Carriage of Goods by Sea Act. Public Act No. 521. Commonwealth Act No. Public Service Act 146. Maritime Commerce Law. Relevant provisions of the Code of Commerce. Warsaw Convention. Convention for the Unification of Certain Rules Relating to International Carriage by Air. Representative Act No. 10668. Representative Act No. 11232. Representative Act No. 7042. As amended by Representative Act No. 8179. Representative Act No. 7652. Representative Act No. 7916. As amended by Representative Act No. 8748. Allowing foreign vessels to transport and co-load foreign cargoes for domestic transshipment. Revised Corporation Code of the Philippines. Foreign Investments Act of 1991. Investors Lease Act. The Special Economic Zone Act of 1995. Page 17 of 19. Exec. Order No. 65. S.2018. Representative Act No. 8799. Representative Act No. 1405. As amended. Representative Act No. 3591. As amended. Representative Act No. 3765. Representative Act No. 7653. As amended by Representative Act No. 11211. Representative Act 11th Regular Foreign Investment Negative List. The Securities Regulation Code. Law on Secrecy of Bank Deposits. Philippine Deposit Insurance Corporation Act. Truth in Lending Act. The New Central Bank Act. The General Banking Law of 2000. Lending Company Regulation Act of 2007. Intellectual Property Code of the Philippines. Use of duly stamped and marked containers. Philippine regulations implementing the protocol relating to the Madrid Agreement concerning the international registration of marks of 2017. Real estate mortgage law. Anti-Money Laundering Act of 2000. Page 18 of 19. Representative Act No. 10142 Financial Rehabilitation and Insolvency Act of 2010. Representative Act No. 10173 and its Data Privacy Act of 2012. Implementing Rules and Regulations. Representative Act No. 11057 and its Personal Property Security Act. Implementing Rules and Regulations. Representative Act No. 10667 and its Philippine Competition Act. Implementing Rules and Regulations. Note: